Good afternoon and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much again for joining this second session of dairy webinars from Arm & Hammer. And today there is a very interesting topic we are going to have, which is DCAD balancing in dairy cows pre and postpartum. And today I'm going to present one of our colleagues, Dr. Ruby Wu, who is expert in DCAD balancing and worked a lot in dairy industry for DCAD balancing programs. She is a practicing nutritionist and working as a dairy support manager in Arm & Hammer for last more than 8 years. So she is going to speak today about how positive and negative DCAD impact health and production in dairy cows. So from here, I'm going to hand over the session to Dr. Ruby Wu. And I would request, if you have any questions, please keep typing in the question and answer session. And in the end of the talk, she's going to take the questions. So Dr. Ruby, now session is to you.
Thank you, Aji. So today I will talk about one of the important topics for transition cows is how negative DCAD and how positive DCAD impacts postpartum health and production. So I will cut it into three parts. First, I will talking about how negative DCAD prepartum affects postpartum production and health. Second, we'll get into practical application and all the field questions I have been asked in the last few years. The last part, I will switch gear to talk about the positive DCAD postpartum and how's that affecting production. 50 years ago, we gave the worst feed to dry cows. Soon we learned the lesson that is not a smart move. Transition cows, 21 days before calving and 21 days post-calving are one of the top important stage of cows. And a good close-up nutrition and management can set a good start for a successful lactation. So 1984 research from Dr. Ali Block has demonstrated that cows have developed hypocalcemia has a higher chance to develop other metabolic disorders. Okay, so this is a graph in 2006 illustrate that the consequence of milk fever and subclinical hypocalcemia. So before I get into this graph, let's talk about some definition. The clinical hypocalcemia, usually the cows will develop symptom. The subclinical hypocalcemia, the cows usually not develop symptom. And the way to define it is you have to take the blood sample the first 14 to 48 hours. And if the blood calcium fall off the threshold, usually we're using anything between 5.5 to 8.5 milligram per deciliter. We call it subclinical hypocalcemia. Subclinical hypocalcemia also develop a higher risk for cow develop other metabolic disorder. Also, subclinical hypocalcemia can be a precursor for clinical hypocalcemia. So like this graph illustrated, both clinical subclinical hypocalcemia will decrease the muscle function, decrease the immune function, and the muscle function will decrease the GI tract motility, decrease the intake, and that decrease the dramatic intake at the calcium into a negative energy balance. And then you will see a higher ketone, higher NEFA, it decrease the reproduction. The decreased rumen refill also increase the chance to get a DA and decrease milk intake. The decreased motility also decreased the uterine motility, and it give a higher risk for developing dystocia. It give a higher chance to develop RP, metritis, and decreased reproduction. The suppressed immune function also give a higher chance to develop RP and metritis. So altogether, this is a bad cycle, and that's the consequence of clinical and subclinical hypocalcemia. DCAD, Dietary Cation-Anion difference, was brought up about 1975, and it has been effectively used to prevent clinical and subclinical hypocalcemia. So different equations were brought up in the last 50 years, and the one I listed here, sodium plus potassium minus chloride minus sulfur, This is the one frequently used, and research has demonstrated it has used this equation to formulate a DCAD is the most effective way to decrease the risk of clinical and subclinical hypocalcemia postpartum. Okay, and the mode of action is formulating a negative DCAD. It acidifies the cows and help mobilize the calcium from the bone, and it increases the blood calcium level, then prevent clinical and subclinical hypocalcemia at the calving. Before I get into the effect of negative DCAD on postpartum performance and health, first let's talk about what does negative DCAD affect prepartum dry matter intake. So before 2018, most commercial PHR product A does not have a good palatability, thus they decrease intake, while product B is good palatability, so not affect intake. However, that rumor, that myth has been solved in 2018, and there are multiple studies after that repeatedly to show that it is not the product cause the intake drop. It is the DCAD level formulating affect the intake. So from this study have shown that the lower intake are caused by the lower DCAD level. It has nothing to do with the products. It has nothing to do with chloride. It's about how much acidification you formulate the DCAD and get the cows to acidify. Okay. Now, negative DCAD is no-brainer. It affects postpartum production. It increases dry matter intake. It increases milk yield. It's repeatedly proved in research. It's repeatedly proved in the field application. Formulate negative DCAD, decrease the postpartum disease, for example, milk fever, RP, uterine disease. It's also demonstrated in meta-analysis, which are usually grouped from a different research study, and showing that negative DCAD prepartum will decrease clinical and subclinical disease postpartum. What else? Negative DCAD also affect immune function. So negative DCAD prepartum also improve neutrophil function. It increased the neutrophil phagocytosis function. Also, research shown that the negative DCAD will have prevent milk fever, which milk fever actually decrease the rumination activity. So we talk about the negative DCAD prepartum affect postpartum production and health. Now, how should we formulate it? Okay, what's the range should we go? We also learned that if you formulate extremely low negative DCAD prepartum, you will affect the prepartum intake. So the balance is between you want to get the benefits to acidify the cows and get all the postpartum performance improvement, but also you don't want to lose or sacrifice too much prepartum intake. So our recommendation is formulating negative DCAD between -8 to -12, okay? And targeting urine pH between 6 to 6.8. And formulating negative DCAD for close-up cows has also other recommendations involved it. So for the close-up diets, it's not just about DCAD, it's also involve other minerals. So first, before I get into minerals, we recommend to feeding a high metabolizable protein. We recommend about 1,200 to 1,300 grams for cows, raise up 100 grams for heifers, and you can drop about 200 grams if you are feeding jerseys, okay? For the calcium, you can either go low or go high, and we recommend you go low. And if you couldn't do low, yes, you can do high. And we'll get into the detail, which, what's the rumor about low or high calcium diets. The next thing for phosphor, we like to formulate less than 0.35. For magnesium, like to formulate at least 0.45. And for potassium, minimum, as low as possible, okay? So with that, let's get into the practical application. You target the negative DCAD between -8 to -12. However, the formulation you made on paper doesn't mean the cow is going to perform as what your paper says. So you have to have a on-farm program set up to monitor where exactly your negative DCAD are and to adjust, to fine-tune it. So usually two options in the States we have. One is using the paper scrap. It's quite convenient. It's like a paper tape to use it. The disadvantage is you won't be able to tell is it 6.2 or whatever. It's only by 6.0, 6.5, so 0.5, as a color difference change. Another option is use the meter. It costs a little bit more, but you can use it, and you want to calibrate it before you use it and rinse between. Okay. Now, what about the frequency to testing urine pH? Ideally, every time you have a ration change, you have a feed ingredient change, you want to test the urine pH again. And after that, you want to set up a weekly or bi-weekly testing on farm. Now, how many cows you should sample? If you have say 100 cows in the close-up pen, then I would suggest you test about 20% of cows, so 20 cows. Now, if you have a smaller close-up group, you only have 15 cows, then take them out, test all the urine pH. How long should you wait after you feed the negative DCAD? So if you feed in the morning, in the afternoon time, majority of cows, if they're eating well, if assuming they eat well, you push feed frequently, the cows are sated by that afternoon. However, there will be some outliers who never not eating well, not eating aggressively, then for their urine pH has not reflected negative DCAD data yet. So ours usually recommend 72 hours, so give it 2-3 days, test it, and make sure be consistent on the time you're testing. If you're always testing after feed, after milking, then do it every time you test it. And also another thing is try to not bring the cow who's about to calve out, because usually their intake is dropping, so they're eating less close-up diets, they're eating less feed, so that means their urine pH is gonna goes up. Now, when you are, for example, when you are taking 20 cows urine pH and you are looking at data, the goal is to not looking at the average. Instead, you are looking at 80% of that 20 urine sample. So here means 16. So 16 of the urine pH, you want them within the range between 6.0 to 6.8. There will be some outliers, and when you cannot get cows to be within this range evenly, you should go back to look into, is there a mixing issue? Is there a sorting issue? Is there any contamination on the urine samples? Now let's talk about the recommendation for the days in close-up pen. Usually people are doing 21 days. However, we all know the cows don't always calve on time. They can easily calve out early. If they have twins, they usually calve out early. So we have seen more and more farms are actually setting about 28 days. Especially for heifer, they sometimes calve out early as well. So you want to make sure they spend enough days in the close-up pen. Another thing is for the close-up pen, you want to minimize the social stress. So, you don't want to move cows every day. Instead, if you can try to do weekly, that way it has less stress for the cows already in the close-up pen, also less stress for the new cows you bring in. So some farm has been setting up between 21 to 28 days. That way it give you an 8 days window. You can bring in cows. That way you can, relatively easy to manage bringing the cows in weekly pace. Now, stocking density, ideally you can do 80%, 75%, maximum to 90%. And just like, a lot of things we learn over the time, we used to give bad feed to transition cow, now we're not, right? We're giving the worst quality feed probably to heifers, not recommended, but that's reality. Same thing, if you are overcrowded, you're like, please not sacrifice transition pen. You might have to either make a change on your facility or just maybe give it to the local, crowded locals, but not the transition cows. Okay. Next thing is really you want to separate the multiparous cows and heifers, because usually the multiparous cows eating very aggressively, so they will get more feed out of the heifers, and their acidification probably not going to be evenly and give you a hard time to adjust your urine pH. And also we'll get into that because the recommendation for multiparous cows and heifers are different on the level of negative DCAD formulation. Next thing is you can, like we talked about, you can keep them 28 days in the close-up pen, no problem. You don't want to keep them too short. You don't want to keep them 7 days. This is extreme study that you won't get any health benefit when you have the cows on close-up diets for only for a week. Now, can you keep it longer than 21, 28 days? Yes, you can. So I personally did a study in 2014 at University of Georgia, actually, and we're looking at 21 days, 24 days, 42 days. It doesn't show anything negative for production if you keep the negative, you keep the close-up cows longer than 21 days. However, you do gonna feed them the high-quality transition cow, the close-up diets longer. That means you will have more investment on the diets there. Recent year, there are some study showing, okay, maybe you don't want to be too long. So cautious should be taken while you look at those recent research, because most of those studies are the retrospective study. They are not designed for the cows or 21 days or 42 days, 60 days pre-calving. Instead, they usually let the cows run multiple years and to go back to look at the record. Now think about if a cows or group of cows end up more than 42 days in the close-up diets, that usually means there's some mess up happening. That is the cows have a wrong predicted calving date there, or is there some errors on the record system? So please be cautious when you read those research data. Some smaller dairy I have been working with, they don't have far-off dry, they don't have close-up dry, 2 dry cow diets. Instead, they only have 1 dry cow group, and there's no problem. You can just feed the negative DCAD diets for the whole dry cow. Now, how about taking blood samples? I was one of the folk back in school taking blood sample. I bleed cows day 0, day 1, day 2, day 4. As a student, you have plenty of time, and I'm working at a research dairy, so you have the facility, everything set up for doing that. Now, in reality, it's very hard for dairy to handle. Also depends on what blood sample you're taking. If you are taking blood sample and you're looking at total blood calcium, it actually doesn't really illustrate how's the cow's calcium status. The ionized calcium is the one. However, that has a higher requirement on the lab. Not all the lab can handle it, and the sample has to process that day to analyze ionized calcium. Another thing is, before 2017, Cornell University has been recommending, doing the take blood samples, set your own data. I think it's still okay to set your own blood calcium data in your own farm. However, be cautious on don't use one cut point as a threshold to decide which cow's sick, which cow's not. And the study after 2018, 2020 had illustrated that there will be different sample need to be taken, and different thresholds needed when you predict different race of cows for different disease. And I'll show you a 2020 study. I'll bring up a term called transient subclinical hypocalcemia. So in this first, these are the heifers, the first lactating cows. The next one is multiple terrace cows, and the right line, which is transient subclinical hypocalcemia. So in the heifer, they are defined day 1, they are dropping it, but day 2, they pick it up. In multiparous cow, you need to take a day 1 sampling and take a day 4 blood sampling, and it goes up. So the transient subclinical hypocalcemia, actually, those are the cows produce the most milk. But if you think about, you use it as a one cut point blood sampling as labeled the cows are sick, which they are not really sick. They do not develop keto. They do not develop ketosis, and they have the highest production during the whole lactation. So just make sure that if you want to continue doing your blood calcium, you need your own data. You probably need multiple day sampling, and for different parity, you need a different threshold. You need a different days of the blood sample to predict the different parameter you want to look at. Otherwise, you could just practically do not worry about this blood calcium level. Now, how about low calcium or high calcium diets? Some commercial company has been recommending you have to feed high calcium diets when you feed negative DCAD diets. It's not true because some of the company, they recommend extremely low DCAD level. So their recommendation might be between -15 to -21. When you feed a extremely low negative DCAD diet, usually the cows will have high urine calcium secretion. And the reason they recommend you to feed high calcium diets is because of that. Okay, research has proved that no matter you are feeding low calcium or high calcium, as soon it does not really affect the calcium blood calcium status, that feeding negative DCAD diets are really the way to help you decrease the risk of milk fever. And this has been repeatedly proved by Jim Brackley, Jesse Goff, us, Ian Lin. Now, 3 years ago, Dr. Barry Bradford had a study that first is feeding low calcium or high calcium diets all perform the same as soon as you formulate a good negative DCAD level, get a good urine pH. That's not the high calcium does not improve calcium blood calcium status for transition cows. Now the difference is when you feed a high calcium diet, you do need to add more anionic supplements to offset the calcium carbonate, the alkaline effect from calcium carbonate, which is usually the source we're bringing as a calcium source. And calcium carbonate, it does not affect DCAD level. However, it does alkali the diets, it alkali the cows. So you have to bring in more supplements to acidify the cows. Now let's talk about magnesium. Recommendation is to set at least, to feed at least 0.45 on magnesium level. Now magnesium source you can bring is not going to be 100% bioavailability. So the old NRC has been reading the basal diets, for example, corn silage, the magnesium in it is set as about 16% bioavailability. For mygox, old NRC thinking it's 0.7. However, in the field, I think we usually feel is about 30%, okay? For the magnesium sulfate, here is they're thinking 90%, but in reality, I think multiple nutrition field is probably gonna be around 70%. So total diets, they put the low bar here about 30%. So this is really depends on the source you are bringing. The new RRC changed a little bit. They think they underestimate the basal diet, so raise up the basal diets magnesium availability. They seem like decrease mygox, which I think this makes sense. It does align to what our field experience see. Now, magnesium sulfate, I think most people were thinking it's probably a little bit higher than 0.27, okay? Now, it doesn't matter what NRC recommended at the end, you know, if you're using one of the two software, for example, NDS or AMTS, those are the two being frequently used. It's going to depend on the feed you bring in there with the bioavailability. So two ways, usually when you bring in the feed, you can go check on the nutrient analysis and you can find the magnesium bioavailability. It will show you what's their bioavailability there. Now, if you go into NDS, they have a feed detail under it. They have a feed analysis, and you go to bioavailability, you can see the difference. So for example, I'm putting all the magnesium salts they have here. I just want to see what the model assigned the availability for them. In NDS, they have mygox for low solubility one and high solubility one, and they assign a different bioavailability here. Now you can't really eyeball the bioavailability by just looking at a mygox, and I'm talking about mygox here because it's magnesium sulfate is a good source of magnesium to use for close-up diets because it also brings sulfur. It helps you acidify the cows. However, the availability, most time I have so many nutritionists and that only can choose mygox. Now mygox, you want to choose the fun particle one because they will usually have a better solubility than the coarse particle one. But when they are all look pretty fun, then what's your choice? If you have a choice that, you know, I'm talking about, if you're not bringing the mygox from the feed meal, which you don't have option, whatever they put it there is there. But when you can make option, you can do a small trial suggested by Jesse Goff to test out how well your mygox can bring up the pH. That way you know how strong the alkali effect of the mygox you are feeding. And when you choose one, be consistent with it. Next thing, I'll talk about sulfur. While I'm doing international training, when I was introduced this to in China, nobody ever talked about the sulfur toxicity in cows. But in the States, our nutritionists are very careful about sulfur levels. I think one of the problems is because the NRC has been recommending less than 0.4 on the sulfur level. Now, real life, the NRC, the recommendation is based on a bunch of old research. They have been using sodium sulfate as the source of sulfur. Biochar, the sulfur source in Biochar is actually linked with methionine and cysteine. And it's just a little bit on ammonium sulfate. So the sulfur in Biochar is a slow release. The sulfur toxicity is when you have a quick release, a large number of quick release sulfur suddenly overwhelms the rumen. And that's getting the toxicity and can get cows to have some neurotoxicity issues. But if you get a slow release of sulfur, you won't have that issue. And nutritionists have been using Biochar and get the sulfur level up to 0.7, no problem. The next, I'm talking about the nDCAD for Heifers. I did some research on this part and dig into what is the application on the nDCAD for Heifers, because I have been asked the question from the field. So first, this is 2 trials in 2021. One large trial separated 2 different experiments, same experiments, sorry, just different production performance level look at it. So they are using about 132 heifers and 3 treatments on prepartum diets is either +20, -5, -15. And let's see what the effects of negative DCAD for heifers. So first, when you formulate a lower DCAD, and there's a linear effect, the lower DCAD you go, you get a lower prepartum intake. This is consistent with the other research we have seen. Now, if you're feeding a lower DCAD, in this case, they get a lower prepartum body weight change. And that is directly associated with the decreased intake you got when you feed a -15. Okay. Next thing is the lower DCAD you go, the lower pH you got. And the lower DCAD you go, the better blood calcium status you got here. And for proportion of the cows pregnant by 305 days, they did see a improvement for negative DCAD. Now for quadratic effects, the lowest milk fever actually happened when you formulate about -5 in this case. And the uterine disease morbidity is all lowest for the -5 DCAD level for prepartum. So now let's look at what has not changed. When you formulate negative DCAD 15, -5 compared with +20, there's no difference on postpartum intake. There's no difference on postpartum milk yield, no difference on components, no difference on the postpartum body weight change. There's no difference on the colostrum yield and quality. There's no difference on, in this case, there's no difference on the preg rate. They have a difference on the preg by 305 days, but overall preg rate, no difference. There's no difference on digestibilities of other minerals. There's no difference on the incidence prevalence of subclinical hypocalcemia in this study. Okay. Now let's look at another study. So this is 2019 meta-analysis, so looking at both multiple cows and preemie cows. So 5 of the experiments are actually the ones using preemie cows. So we pick up the data and they do the stats. And the range is between -15 to +22. And the stats has shown that if we're formulating a -10 for the heifers, you are actually decrease the prepartum intake, the lower DCAD you go, the lower intake you get, again here. In this case, they did see a negative response on the production, on the fat, butter fat, on the fat fracted milk. But last study, we did not see the difference on production, okay? They did not see the difference on the prepartum, postpartum body weight change or body condition change. They do not see difference in milk yield or efficiency. They do see a good benefits when you feed -10 to get a lower RP, lower metritis, and they do not see the difference on max standard. So combine all of this study, seems like formulating negative DCAD for heifers it improved the blood calcium status, and it decreased the uterine disease, but there's no difference on the body weight change postpartum. And on the production majority for the milk yield, both study does not show a difference. So our recommendation is, if you are feeding a close-up diet and that you have a mix of multiparous cows and heifers together, then let's still target your negative DCAD at -8 to -12 to make sure your multiparous cows get full benefits. And that associated with that, you want to monitor your urine pH between 6 to 6.8. Now, if you are formulating just for the heifers, and based on the study we have seen, the heifers will get benefits of uterine disease, decreased uterine disease, better blood calcium status. But you don't want to lose the prepartum intake. So that's why we're recommending feeding a little bit negative, but not extremely low DCAD. So we're feeding -5 to -8, and that narrow down your urine pH window between 6.4 to 6.8. Now, I have been asked that two different questions. One of the herd heifers, they have problem. They're using positive DCAD. So what's my recommendation? My recommendation is, yes, go ahead. Let's try this negative DCAD, not too low, and target their urine pH 6.4 to 6.8. And they have uterine disease. That's why we want to go to this route. Another herd, they're using positive DCAD for heifers, and they don't have uterine disease. They don't have RPs. My recommendation is stay where you are, because you won't get additional benefits to get milk yield improvement or anything by change to this negative DCAD test for heifers. So with that, I can show you here a little bit economic for the US, that this is pretty much a no-brainer, that you get additional milk yield, you have less cost on the cow's disease treatment, and so no matter what your milk price at, there is a positive ROI comes off using negative DCAD. Now I'm gonna switch gear talking about postpartum. We're using the same equation. That's the good thing: sodium plus potassium minus chloride minus sulfur. Now for the postpartum cows, usually lactation is an acid producing function. So the mammary gland, the liver respiration usually leads to a depletion of buffers, and the blood NEFA, blood ketone, and all those metabolic profiles. So the cows are actually in a deficit of base excess. So in this case, postpartum, we want to go to a positive DCAD. And here is why. More positive you go on the positive on the DCAD you get, the higher buffer level you get. The higher DCAD level you go, the higher blood pH is. The higher DCAD you go, the higher dry matter intake you get. And the higher DCAD you go, the higher fat chloride milk you get. Now, from both of this, you can see there will be a threshold, because once you pass the threshold, you're not really getting additional benefits. Now, let's look at what meta-analysis show here. There is a linear effects that you increase DCAD, you increase butterfat, yield of milk fat, you increase the rumen pH, you improve the digestibility, you improve the efficiency. And it's about every 10 points you move up, you will get butterfat is 0.05 accordingly. Like I mentioned, there will be a threshold, and here is quadratic effect of positive DCAD on the postpartum dry matter intake and the milk yield. So overall, our recommendation is for high cows, let's feed around mid-40. For low cows, you can do a mid-30. You can't really achieve this high DCAD diets by just using your regular forage, because you can see there's variations on the corn silage DCAD level you get. So usually you will need to add buffer to get DCAD level to a desired range. Another way to using potassium carbonate, I will now illustrate here. So DCAD Plus is one of our products. The ingredients is potassium carbonate. So feeding potassium carbonate can positively influence butterfat production while you are feeding the high-fat byproducts. So for example, when you're using cottonseed or DDGs, there are high-level unsaturated fatty acid in the diets. And while the rumen biohydrogenation pathway will produce a unfavorable intermediate called trans-10-cis-12, which they are the culprit because of milk fat depression. This is very common when you are feeding a cottonseed diets or DDG diets. Now, while you are feeding a potassium carbonate, you can change the biohydrogenation to a desired pathway. Instead of cis-10 trans-12, you can get into the intermediate of trans-11, which this one is not going to cause milk fat depression. So a lot of nutritionists I know, when they are feeding a high unsaturated polyunsaturated fatty acid, they will actually bump up their potassium level very high. The RRC has been recommending potassium level about 1.2. However, the research has shown that that's not enough to get all the benefits of production. So this study have compared with 1.28, compared with 2% on potassium level. You get additional 8 pounds of fat corrected milk. You get 3 pounds of flow, and majorly you get about 0.4 on the butterfat percentage here. Now let's look at another 12, which 2 treatments. One is control, one is treatment. The control, both control and treatment, they have 3 periods of time. The first period of time, 7 days, period 2, 21 days, period 3, 14 days. For the control diets, for all 3 periods of time, they are stay on 1.7% for potassium level. That's for the control treatment. For the treatment diets, the first period, they are same as control at 1.7 per potassium. On period 2, they bump up potassium to 2.3%. At period 3, they decrease the potassium back to 1.7 for just like control again. Now let's look at it, effects. And this is using a meat lactation cows, okay? So when you see the control group during the 7 days, 21 days, 14 days, the control cow who's on 1.7 is a meat lactating cow, so they are decreasing the energy corrected milk. Their efficiency are decreasing. But if you look at this potassium carbonate treatment, now let's look at butterfat. For the treatment cows in period 2 have a higher butterfat. In period 3, this is not having any carryover effect. Just like control cows, they're losing it, butterfat. For fat yield, treatment cows have a better period 2 because they bump up from 1.7 to 2.3 on potassium level. And then when you're back to 1.7, they're decreasing again. But control cows are doing way worse compare the treatment cows. So overall, when you're feeding potassium carbonate, you get additional milk flow, you get additional butterfat improvement, and with that, you get a positive ROI again. So with that, our recommendation, to summarize, for transition close-up cows, -8 to -12, for postpartum, high cows, 45, low cows, 35. And no matter you are doing pre or post DCAD formulation, first you want to do a wet chemistry to check out what your current minerals level are. And for the postpartum, if you can, choose a high potassium forage and remove as much chlorides as you can. Next thing is the cheapest way to bring up DCAD is using sodium bicarb. And I think you can start with 1 pound there. Next, use a potassium carbonate to bump up your potassium level. In the summer, I would recommend you go 1.8 to 2%. In a non-summer time, you can use 1.7% as your target. The last thing, look at your magnesium level to make sure the magnesium, the potassium versus magnesium are within the ratio 4:1 to 5:1. So with that, are my presentation today, and now let's look into questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ruby. A very nice presentation, very much informative. I have a lot of questions, and as per the time constraints, we will try to get answer from Dr. Ruby as much as possible. So I will start from some questions, and in the meantime, if you are having more questions, please submit. We will try to answer them all, and if not, then we'll come back to you with answers through email. So, Dr. Ruby, the first question is coming from what is the effect of low urine pH on parathyroid hormone? I think this is from the negative DCAD part. The question is coming. Like if the pH is low, 5.5, what is going to be the effect on parathyroid hormone?
A good question. So the idea of feeding negative DCAD is you are feeding of course, negative DCAD, you acidify the cows and you stimulate the parathyroid hormone, so that stimulate the calcium mobilization. So once you acidify the cows, you don't have to go 5.5. Once you go 6.8, the cows are already acidified and the parathyroid hormone already start to function to stimulate calcium mobilization. Now, I guess your question is probably saying whether going extremely low have a negative effects on it. I personally gonna need to look into more research to see whether there's a negative effect. Now, when you're feeding extremely low DCAD like 5.5, you usually will have a high urine minerals excretion. And in there might be some problem on some other minerals absorption there.
Right, thank you. Another question is coming about the apparatus. So do you know any apparatus which can check the DCAD level in the feed, or only the wet chemistry is the one you will recommend?
So let me make sure I understand the question. Is there like a way to check the DCAD level in the feed to I have not seen any meter, anything to check the the feed DCAD. I mean, we see the things checking on mycotoxin, moisture level, of course. The program has been pretty much being used here are checking urine pH. There's a cliche way to say cows are eating 3 rations. One you feed on paper, one of your feeder really mix in TMR, and the last one is the cows really select to eat at the end. So usually we're using the urine pH as a way to monitor and fine-tune and back to fine-tune your DCAD levels. But I'll look into that to see whether there's any directly feed meter to check on DCAD level, because usually we're gonna need to send the feed sample to the lab to check on the wet chemistry. We think the infra is probably not as accurate as the wet chemistry for the minerals level.
Thank you. The other question is coming around, is it enough to determine DCAD addition to ration by pH test? And what should be the pH range of the test result?
The recommendation is on urine pH between 6.0 to 6.8 if you are formulating a negative DCAD for multiparous cows. If you are doing to the Heifers, like I mentioned in the study, I would recommend you go between 6.4 to 6.8 as the level for Heifers.
So yeah, so the another comment is coming. It's not a question like about the presentation slides and certificates. So yes, as last time also, I have told the one who is attending all 4 sessions of the webinar is going to attend a certificate signed by all the speakers, and presentations, yes, we are going to send to the attendees. The next question coming, Dr. Ruby, is can we achieve DCAD by using calcium chloride?
You can. So first, you did bring in chloride. So on the DCAD level wise, of course, you are achieving it. Now the calcium is not really affected DCAD in equation wise. So for a DCAD level standpoint, you are able to using it. You are able to achieve the DCAD by using the chloride salts.
Thank you. The next question is, what set of microbes do increase or decrease when diets are balanced for negative and positive DCAD?
This is a great question. I do not have an answer for that. You actually open my mind to look into what's the microbes population change when you're feeding negative DCAD. As I show here, the research has been pretty much demonstrated negative DCAD, positive DCAD on the buffering effect, production, health, rumination, the immune function. Now, what's the effect on microbes? I don't know. I hope there's paper out there, and I'll write down your name, and when I dig it out, I'll email you those information. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Dr. Ruby. So whenever you can just send or share the paper. It would be great. Okay. And I think you are becoming very impressive and informative. People are asking for internship under you, so it's up to you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Now another question is coming. How about adding calcium while using DCAD? I think I'm also not very much clear on this question. So they're asking calcium while using negative DCAD.
Yeah, so we talk about it because there, unfortunately, there is a lot of myths brought in by different commercial companies. Some companies are recommending high calcium, which is really unnecessary. I mean, usually we have been talking about you either do low calcium or high calcium. Originally, the high calcium we're recommending, while I was in school, we're talking about doing high calcium. It's because sometimes we have a hard time to feed a low calcium level. So that's why we're going high. Back to 8 years ago, we're talking about 1%, 100 gram calcium is high. And then you look at the research, it has been bumped up 1.2, it's called high. Now it's 1.8, now you're looking at 2%. So what is high calcium? Is just the definition has been changed. Also, while I was working in the field talking with nutritionists, I pretty much heard dietary calcium level everywhere. Even the 0.9, that 0.85, those kind of in the, or 1% in the middle range, there's people feeding it and the cows are pretty fine. There's no milk fever. And I think one of the graph I show here is really the risk for milk replacer is extremely low if you're feeding negative DCAD. So it really doesn't matter you are feeding high or low calcium, because when you're feeding negative DCAD, you lower the risk to a very low level. That's why I think when I heard from nutrition, no matter which level, low, middle, and high, they don't have problem because they're all using negative DCAD to get the cows already in a very good prevention range there.
Thank you, Dr. Ruby. Another comment is coming about the use of pH meters or pH papers. So I think please you can contact with your Arm & Hammer representative for more details and support.
That's
on
Aji's call. As a marketing too.
Yeah. So anyone from the Arm & Hammer who is serving you, please you can contact him or her. Another question is coming, Dr. Ruby, about DCAD data on beef, cattle, and sheep. What do you suggest in that? Is it still relevant?
Yeah. So there are some papers on the sheep, at least I saw those papers. The mode of action is the same. It's all the same. It's gonna CDPEC cows. If you feed a negative DCAD, you get a urine pH, So I do have those papers I can send to your way.
Thank you. Yeah, you can send the details and we will share. So we have some time for more questions. So another question, Dr. Ruby, is coming. Suppose the urine pH of transition cow is 7. So what is average negative DCAD level target for this kind of situation?
So if you are at 7, I would think you might be -2 around there. There is a little bit correlation graph I have there. But that's, the cow sometimes make a selection on what you think on paper. The curve does not play exactly like the cow show, but the urine pH, I think it's, I would go a little bit lower than 7. I know there's some paper out there even talking about 7.3, but I think as a practical on-farm application, I think if you go 6.8 is probably better, because say I'm testing 20% of cow, or let's just say 20 cows there. If you're, I don't know, there's no way you're gonna get everybody exactly 7. So you're probably gonna say your majority is at 7. That means a lot of your cows are 7.5 or 8 there, very high. So to get overall herd a CD5, so I would recommend you go a little bit lower than that.
Thank you. The question is like, can I add DCAD in the mixer wagon? So I think it's about the DCAD product. What do you suggest, Dr. Ruby?
Either way, we have folks just directly adding negative DCAD to the, the feed mill handles that they bring in, and you're adding forage at farm. You don't have to deal with your own negative DCAD on dairy. There are also dairy, they do the way that they have a little bit negative DCAD on in the mix already, but they also have a bag of Velcro on farm. That way they fine tune a little bit, because like I said, when you check urine pH, if it's too high, you want to add a little bit more, but you already have the mix already, right? So that's the time people sometimes have a bag of extra anionic supplements on dairy to just fine tune it.
Thank you, Dr. Ruby. And there is some comment from our expert, Dr. Elliot Block, about the use of DCAD in sheep and beef animals. So in Australia, there is some use of negative DCAD to prevent urinary calculi in ewes and rams very successfully, as well as positive DCAD research showing in very nice growth in beef cattle during the post-weaning phase. If improved, is very much improved while we increase the DCAD value. So yeah, both sheep and beef have a nice response on DCAD balancing in the ration. So more details definitely we are going to share with you, but this is a quick comment from our expert. We have some more time to take a few more questions. Dr. Ruby, there is another question coming that in our farm, salt level is very high in water. So how it can be like overcome this issue?
Yeah, so if you can, I think I might now illustrate, sorry for that, take water samples, and that way when you analyze this, when you formulate your DCAD, you can count that in the the chloride level if that's the case. But I think to be accurate, I would definitely look at collect urine pH and fine tune there. Again, you can't really change the water they are taking there. So I mean, unless you're doing some filter thing, but you probably need to lower your additional ions in your feed if you get a lot of in from the water already.
Thank you, Dr. Ruby. The next question is coming. Can we increase magnesium level or magnesium percent from biochlor? Because most of the time we have to add another source of magnesium to reach 0.45%.
Yes, there is magnesium in biochlor, so that will help you lower your magnesium, additional magnesium source usage there.
Another question coming, Dr. Ruby, what is the relationship between pH and dose of negative DCAD?
Yeah, the lower DCAD you go, the lower pH you got. The -8 to -12 I have been talking about, that usually give you within the range of 6 to 6.8. If you are formulating negative, above -5 there, you will usually getting very close to around 7 there.
Thank you. There is a question coming around that calving date is not 100% accurate sometimes. So how one can manage DCAD for this 21 days?
Yeah, that's why I was been recommending that bring them in early, because my personal research doesn't show negative effects if you keep the cows even 42 days on the negative DCAD. Like I said, there's some retrospective studies show that too long is not good. However, they are still better than if you are feeding them the negative diets for shorter time, because so they are looking at performance. If you ideally around 21, 28 days, that's the best. I'm talking about for those retrospective studies. The next one is, okay, too long is not good, but still, again, they're better than keep them on negative for short time. So for that, I would say just really bring in them early. I would go 28 above in this case, for your case.
Okay, so you are recommending a little bit like more number of days in this kind of scenario, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. There is another question coming around. We are just going to take one or two more questions because time is just finishing out. The question is, if animal is suffering from ruminal acidosis, so should we still reduce DCAD level of the fresh diet?
For the acidosis, yeah, I got you. So what you are doing, acidified cows, acidified diets, I'm not asking you to acidify the rumen. So usually when you're feeding the DCAD diets, you're not changing the rumen pH level. So now for your acidosis issues, you should look into, is that starch, cliche, is it starch level? Is it chopping it too fine, not the long enough particle there? But the negative DCAD will not affect your, it's not affecting your rumen pH level. It's very minimal. So I'm talking about acidified cows is on the metabolic level. It's on the systemic level. It's not in the rumen level.
Right. And next question is related to this, and this is the last questions, and whatever, there are many more questions remaining, so we'll try to answer by email. I think this is related to this question, that if there is this kind of effect, so any effect of yeast culture based product on this kind of balancing, DCAD balancing, or this kind of situation?
That's a great question. Is like the one I have the notes here, is there negative DCAD affect a microbe population? I think there's going to be research I'll conduct altogether to dig into it. I mean, mode of action wise, it feed the yeast culture, it will affect your digestion, right? And now again, this is more on the rumen modifier part. The negative DCAD balancing is more affecting on the systemic part. Are there any relationship? I gotta have to dig to be responsible, give you a good answer. I gotta dig on the research a little bit on this. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ruby, for your very nice and informative presentation, as well as all the questions handling. I hope we are trying to cover up most of the questions, but still there are many questions remaining. So we'll request Dr. Ruby to come back with the answers, and we'll reply through emails. Thank you again. And there are two more sessions remaining. I would request and encourage everyone to just register for those remaining two sessions also. And I hope they are quite informative and it will help in your operations. Thank you again. Thank you, Dr. Ruby. And see you in the next session. Thank you, everyone. Bye.